Well, my friends, the day has finally arrived. Everyone has been waiting with one eye on the calendar since 2023, and at long last, the Super Mario Galaxy movie is finally in theaters. Seeing the return of the mushroom-hating man himself, as well as Luigi, Toad, Peach, Bowser, and introducing the beloved characters of Yoshi, Princess Rosalina, Bowser Jr., and many, many more. Now, I'm gonna start this review by making a confession and a concession. I am not a big Super Mario fan, which is to say that I, unlike many people out there, was not raised on the games. The biggest reason for that being that I just didn't have a Nintendo growing up, or video games, and I really don't know why. It's not like my parents were anti-technology. I had computer games and was allowed to play them all the time. I was a movie fan even as a kid, and therefore grew up with my eyes super glued to the TV screen, but I guess they just never saw the appeal of video games themselves. Ergo, I did not have Xbox, PlayStation, and I did not have Nintendo. Now, once my younger sisters entered the picture, we eventually got Game Boys, which introduced me to Mario Kart, and then late into my teenage years we got a Wii, so I played more Mario Kart, but bigger. And then years and years later, my sister got a Switch, and we started playing Mario Party as adults. And I loved these games. I thought they were super fun, but in comparison to most people, my knowledge of Mario and the extent of the lore is puddle deep at best. And the reason I bring all of this up is that when the first film came out in 2023, I really didn't know how much I was going to enjoy or connect with it simply because I didn't know how many references I was going to catch. And I ended up loving the film. I thought it was funny, exciting, surprisingly emotional at points. Visually, it was one of the most stunning films I had seen up until that point. And while I knew that many of the deeper references were going right over my head, I never once felt lost or left behind by the film. I saw it 3 times in theaters and liked it more with each viewing. I didn't even mind the needle drops. But I think that the true beauty of that movie lay in its simplicity. The film was, among many things, an origin story that wasn't just about Mario and Luigi, but a full-on introduction and immersion into this magical world. It was also an ensemble with an incredibly vibrant cast of characters, all of whom got to have their personalities established and some room to leave an impression on the viewer. The film was filled to the brim with references to the massive world of the games, with every shot just a gorgeous buffet of Easter eggs. And so the film, I thought, very wisely opted to keep the storyline very straightforward. We have 2 brothers who are whisked off to a magical land, befriend the beautiful princess, fight the evil villain who wants the princess for himself, and ultimately save the day. It was simple, it was concise, and it was focused. And I cannot say that about this movie. In fact, to all of the critics who stuck their nose up so aggressively at the first film for being too simple, here's a spoon to eat your words with. Because this film pretty much just said, the hell with telling a straightforward story. The hell with editing. We're throwing everything at the wall. Which by all accounts should have been exactly what the naysayers for that first film wanted, but instead these same people are now out here throwing just as much shade at this one. Which begs the serious question,
what do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
The criticism for the first film and now this one is such that it makes me hesitant to voice the criticisms that I do have about it. Mostly because I just don't want to be in the same league as these people who are hurling so much vitriol at it. I want to be honest, and I'm going to be. I'm not going to sit here and lob nothing but praise on a film simply because I think that a good bit of the criticism against this franchise is really overblown and unfair, but I'm certainly not going to throw rocks at it and pretend that there's not a lot to like about it, which there is. This film is a kid who has had way too much sugar set loose in a toy store with his mom's credit card, all over the place with not one bit of focus, but don't tell me that you don't want to be that kid. Alright, enough stalling. Let's get into this plot. The film picks up not too long after the events of the first one. Mario and Luigi are now living in the Mushroom Kingdom with Peach, and we get a really funny intro with them where they're called to a neighboring kingdom to investigate a blocked pipe. They're plumbers, it's what they do. And along the way, they end up meeting Yoshi the dinosaur. Not a spoiler, he's in all the trailers, on all the posters, and much has been made about Donald Glover providing the voice, which I will say he does a great job. Meanwhile, in a neighboring galaxy, Princess Rosalina is captured by Bowser Jr. as part of his dastardly plan against the galaxy and the universe at large, all in the hopes of impressing his dad, who has been imprisoned by Peach since the end of the first film. Once word of this plan reaches the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario, Luigi, and Peach must spring into action once again to save the day. Now that is the most bare-bones version of this plot that I can possibly give. Not because it's overly complicated and hard to explain, but because I really can't go into any more detail without edging into spoiler territory. And that's because every shot, every sequence, and every character in this film is a reference fans to the games and designed to trigger the memories in the viewer of playing those games. I saw this film with a very respectful audience who were all courteous enough to keep their voices down, but all throughout I could hear excited murmuring and whispers every couple of minutes whenever a new character was introduced, a new vehicle, a setting, even certain musical cues had people gasping with joy. And I've seen negative reviews flat out condemning the movie for this, which I genuinely don't get because, guys, it's a Mario Brothers movie. It's based on a series of puzzle games where you go from crazy location to crazy location and meet these zany creatures and characters along the way. Of course, the movie is going to be made up of nothing but that. And in my opinion, it should be. You're telling me that you wanted Nintendo to make a movie where they make up all new characters and all new locations? I, for the life of me, do not understand this criticism, especially when every shot of this film is an incredible, jaw-dropping piece of CGI animation. It is beautiful. I'd even go so far as to say it's even more beautiful than the last one. Every surface here has weight and color and texture. For example, there's a puppet show sequence in here, I was talking to my partner about this after, that had us both wondering whether that was entirely CG or if they did some kind of mixed media to render the fabric effects, because they were that convincing. And there's another sequence involving a castle being lifted into the air, then dropping thousands of feet where it crashes to the ground and starts sliding at full force down a hill. And you can feel the sheer weight and size of it to where the peril really comes across. It's an amazing sequence and one of the many reasons you should see this film in IMAX if you're able. In fact, I have to stop this review for a minute to say this. We are living in a world where even people who aren't film savvy are starting to notice how so many movies shot today look flatly lit and completely desaturated. In short, they look ugly and cheap. To where unless you're watching a film by Guillermo del Toro, James Cameron, or Christopher Nolan, you can half expect a finished film that looks gray-washed and lifeless by the time it reaches your TV. And I'm talking high-budget productions backed by major studios. And in that world, there is no way that I could ever give a 1-star rating to a movie that puts as much effort and care into its visuals as this film does. Anyone saying that this film looks ugly or God help you looks like AI is completely out of line. Throwing shade like that at visual artists for the sake of juicing up your review is gross, disrespectful, and dishonest, especially when AI is being increasingly shoved down our throats to the detriment of actual art and artists. All right, taking a breather. As for performances, everyone here does a good to great job. We have the returning voice talents of Chris Pratt, Charlie Day, Anya Taylor-Joy, Keegan-Michael Key, the obvious standout for me being Jack Black, who is a pitch-perfect Bowser, and I mean that literally as he spends a good portion of the film pitched up to sound squeaky, and it's hilarious.
And also trim the bonsai bush. Here we go.
But the other MVP for me is Benny Safdie as Bowser Jr., who, like Jack Black, brings such a fun and diabolical energy to his character. The two of them are great together, having not just the funniest lines in the movie, but easily the most interesting dynamic. At least at first, where Bowser is actually starting to soften in his feelings towards Mario and Luigi, but he's being increasingly pulled back to his darker nature by his son, who idolizes him and is doing everything he's doing to impress him. I was really curious where the film was going to go with this dynamic, and that is unfortunately where my criticisms of the movie really come in. There were points all throughout this movie where I really wanted it to slow off the action for a bit so we could actually get some real interplay between characters. And while the characters were light in the first movie, they still had depth to them, because the film actually spent enough time to develop their personalities and relationships. I actually teared up at the end of that first movie where Mario is reminded of how he and Luigi have always had each other's backs and why they're stronger as a unit. Whereas I don't think this film ever quite succeeds at striking the balance between action and character. It wants to take the audience on this epic, galaxy-hopping adventure, and it does do that. But I think it would have really been helped by adding some quieter moments in between the action set pieces to actually build arcs for these characters. Like I said before, Bowser and Bowser Jr. are the closest we come to that, and Mario and Luigi to a certain extent, mostly because they just share the screen pretty consistently. But as for the rest of our ensemble, while they all do get a fair bit of screen time, with I think Rosalina easily getting the least, it's mostly to move the plot forward through their physical actions and exposition. This is especially true, I think, for Peach, who has one of the most important storylines and character arcs on paper, but it's only explored in the most surface level of ways to where there's no emotional depth to it. This film ultimately wants to go in so many different directions, but in order for that to work, we need the characters to anchor us. Otherwise, there comes a point where we feel like we've lost the movie's thread, or we're just not feeling the stakes of it anymore. I really think that if this film had trimmed a minute off of each action sequence, of which there are several, it could have had the time to develop the characters significantly more than it did, and therefore therefore given itself a deeper emotional core. The film is not as well constructed as it could be because most of the character arcs that are introduced are left unresolved, and in some cases pretty sloppily, to where at the end when the credits started rolling, I actually did a kind of double take where I was like, wait, it's over? But what about this, and okay, I guess they'll pick that up in the next movie. And it is precisely for that reason that I'm not as excited to watch this movie in theaters again the same way I was with the last one. Because despite it being significantly bigger in many ways than its predecessor, there's a lot of empty space that makes it weaker, and therefore not able to truly stand on its own as a fully contained movie. Now, all that said, I do not think that this is a terrible movie, and it does make for a fun experience. I would liken it to spending a whole day at an amusement park to where you're having a great time, the rides are super exciting, and everything around you is colorful and eye-catching, but there does come a point where you're like, all right guys, I need a break and a power bar. In fact, I went to Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios not too long ago, and it was a lot like watching this movie. Really fun, really exciting, but eventually I was like, okay, let's go ride the Mummy again. I feel like we've been here long enough. Like I've already said, I think a good portion of the criticism against this film is ridiculously overblown, as if by not being a perfect film, it is somehow contributing to some affront against the arts or signaling the imminent death of cinema, and that's stupid. This is a flawed film. It's unbalanced, it's messy, it's overstuffed to be sure, but it still manages to be fun. It has some genuinely hilarious moments. The animation is incredible, and I am excited for there to be a third, which we know just by the opening box office results that they're absolutely making that third film. I just hope that when they do, it's more finely tuned than this one was and allows the characters significantly more breathing room. And weighing the good with the bad, I do recommend seeing this movie in a theater. It's the kind of cinematic experience where the bigger and louder you see it, the better. And be sure to stay past the end credits if you're in the mood for a couple of stingers. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me on another review. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed my take on the Super Mario Galaxy movie, or if you could not disagree with me more. I appreciate the support either way. Feel free to leave a comment with your own thoughts and opinions. Just make sure to keep this a safe space for everyone and keep your comments respectful. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
Wahoo!